Imagine standing in a cold prison yard, your hands shaking, your heart pounding so hard you can barely breathe. Soldiers are lined up in front of you with rifles. The execution order has already been read. You know exactly what comes next. In just a few seconds, your entire existence will disappear forever. No more memories, no more dreams, no more future. Only darkness. Now imagine something even stranger. At the very last second, right before death arrives, you are suddenly told you can live. How would that moment change a human mind? Would you ever see life the same way again? Would fear disappear? Or would reality itself begin to feel different? Tonight, we're exploring one of the most haunting psychological transformations in history, the story of a man who psychologically survived his own death and came back completely transformed. A man whose suffering would later shape some of the deepest novels ever written. That man was Fyodor Dostoevsky. And what happened to him may explain something terrifying about the human mind itself. Because sometimes, the people who stare directly into death return with truths ordinary people never see. Welcome to the Book Lens. Chapter 1. The young man who believed in ideas. Before the world knew Dostoevsky as a legendary writer, he was simply a young intellectual living in Russia during the 1800s. Passionate, curious, restless. He loved philosophy. He loved politics. And like many intelligent young men, he believed society could become something better. At that time, Russia was ruled with extreme control. Freedom of speech was dangerous. Political criticism could destroy your life. But Dostoevsky became involved with a discussion group of intellectuals who secretly debated philosophy, reform, and politics. At first, it probably felt harmless. Just conversations, ideas, hope. But authoritarian governments fear ideas more than weapons, because ideas can spread, and eventually, the government decided these young thinkers were a threat. One night, Dostoevsky was arrested. Suddenly, his entire world collapsed. He was thrown into prison, interrogated, isolated. Months passed in uncertainty. No one knew what would happen to him. Then finally, the sentence arrived. Death. Execution by firing squad. And this is where the story becomes almost impossible to believe. Chapter 2. The Walk Toward Death. December 22nd, 1849. A freezing morning in St. Petersburg. Dostoevsky and other prisoners were taken outside. The soldiers stood ready. The prisoners were dressed in execution clothes. Some men prayed. Some cried. Some went completely silent. And according to witnesses, Dostoevsky became intensely aware of time itself. Every second suddenly felt priceless. Every breath became meaningful. Imagine what happens inside the human brain during those final moments. Your entire life flashes through your mind. Regrets, dreams, failures, people you love. Everything becomes painfully real. Psychologists today understand that near-death experiences can radically transform consciousness. Ecologytoday.com. Many survivors describe life afterward as strangely vivid. Colors feel brighter. Moments feel deeper. Small things suddenly matter. And standing there in front of death, Dostoevsky reportedly experienced something extraordinary. He realized how much humans waste life, how blindly people move through existence without appreciating it, because most people secretly believe they have time, until suddenly, they don't. The execution order was read, the rifles were prepared, and then, at the absolute last second, everything changed. A messenger arrived with a new order from the Tsar. The execution was canceled. It had all been staged. The prisoners would live. But psychologically, Dostoevsky had already crossed the line between life and death, and he would never become the same man again. Chapter 3. The Mind After Death. Think carefully about what happened here. Dostoevsky didn't almost die in battle. He fully believed death was certain. His brain experienced the emotional reality of actual execution, and surviving that kind of trauma can permanently alter human perception. Modern neuroscience suggests extreme life-threatening situations can deeply reshape emotional processing, fear systems, and personal meaning. Fear.com. After this experience, people often begin questioning everything. What matters? What is suffering for? Why are humans so afraid of death? What gives life meaning? These questions consumed Dostoevsky for the rest of his life, and strangely, his suffering became the source of his genius. Because after facing death directly, he understood human psychology in a way very few writers ever could. His novels stopped feeling like stories. They became psychological mirrors. Dark, intense, painfully human. He could see into guilt, fear, despair, madness, loneliness, and most importantly, the hidden chaos inside ordinary people. Chapter 4. Why suffering changes people. Most people spend their lives trying to avoid suffering. But Dostoevsky believed suffering reveals truth. And honestly, that idea makes modern society uncomfortable. Because today, people are constantly distracted. Phones, entertainment, noise. Anything to avoid silence. Anything to avoid confronting uncomfortable thoughts. But suffering forces confrontation. When humans lose comfort, their deepest fears appear. And Dostoevsky noticed something disturbing. Many people don't actually know who they are until life breaks them. That's why his characters feel so real. They are not perfect heroes. They are fractured humans struggling with meaning. People fighting guilt, addiction, pride, jealousy, isolation. The same invisible battles millions still fight today, and perhaps that's why Dostoevsky continues influencing psychology, philosophy, and literature even now. Tenga.com. Because he understood something timeless, the human mind is far darker and far deeper than most people realize. Chapter 5. The strange gift of mortality. After surviving execution, Dostoevsky developed an almost obsessive awareness of life itself. Moments became sacred. Even ordinary existence felt miraculous. And here's the strange paradox. Sometimes people only learn how valuable life is when they genuinely believe they are about to lose it forever. Think about modern life for a second. People constantly postpone happiness. I'll enjoy life later. I'll rest later. I'll appreciate people later. But death destroys the illusion of later. And that realization haunted Dostoevsky permanently. He once described how a condemned man values every final minute more intensely than entire years of ordinary life. That insight would later appear throughout his novels, especially in works like The Idiot and Crime and Punishment. His characters constantly struggle with mortality, guilt, redemption, and spiritual emptiness. Because he wasn't writing theory, he was writing from experience. Real psychological terror, real existential fear. Chapter 6. Why modern people feel lost. Now here's where this story becomes deeply relevant today. Modern society is materially advanced, but emotionally, spiritually, many people feel completely disconnected. People scroll endlessly, consume endlessly, work endlessly, yet millions secretly feel empty inside. And Dostoevsky would probably understand exactly why. Because humans are not machines. People need meaning, purpose, connection, something deeper than distraction. But modern culture often teaches people to avoid pain instead of understanding it, to escape discomfort instead of learning from it. And maybe that's why anxiety, loneliness, and depression continue rising globally. Because humans can survive suffering, but meaninglessness is much harder to survive. Dostoevsky understood this long before modern psychology existed. That's why his writing still feels strangely modern, almost prophetic. Chapter 7. The fear that controls humanity. At the center of Dostoevsky's philosophy was one terrifying realization. Most human behavior is secretly controlled by fear. Fear of rejection, fear of failure, fear of loneliness, fear of suffering, fear of death. And because humans fear death so deeply, they spend enormous amounts of energy distracting themselves from it. Entertainment, pleasure, status, power, noise, anything to avoid confronting mortality. But after his execution experience, Dostoevsky could no longer hide from death psychologically. He had already met it face to face. And strangely, that may have made him more alive than most people. Because once humans fully accept mortality, small things stop controlling them. Petty arguments lose importance. Fake status becomes meaningless. And life itself becomes more precious. Final chapter: the men who return from darkness. So what really happens to a man's mind when he survives his own death? Sometimes he returns broken, but sometimes he returns awake. Dostoevsky came back with a terrifying understanding of human existence, that life is fragile, time is limited, and beneath civilization's surface, every human being is wrestling with fear, suffering, and meaning. His experience transformed him from an ordinary intellectual into one of history's greatest psychological writers, not because he studied humanity from a distance, but because he stared directly into the darkest parts of existence and survived. And maybe that's why his words still affect people today, because modern humans are still searching for the same answers. What gives life meaning? How should we face suffering? And how do we live knowing death can arrive at any moment? Perhaps the real tragedy is not death itself. Perhaps the real tragedy is living without ever truly realizing you are alive. And maybe that is the lesson Dostoevsky brought back from the edge of death. A lesson written not in theory, but in terror. And once you understand it, you may never look at life the same way again. Share your opinion in comment box. Subscribe for more videos. Thanks for watching.